Good afternoon, board members. This is my presentation for DMG 810 Research as a Tool for Management Decision Making, Project 3, titled Evaluate a Quantitative Research Article. Context. The CEO of Brookshire Industries is retiring, and he has tapped his daughter, May, to replace him. May believes that instituting a servant leadership culture within Brookshire would improve performance across the board. For that reason, she's contemplating using Melcar and Bosco's article titled Achieving High Organizational Performance Through Servant Leadership. However, the problem is that servant leadership is a relatively new field in management that is lacking in much empirical research. So it is important that Brookshire gets it right by carefully evaluating Melcar and Bosco to determine whether the study in itself can help the new CEO achieve our objective. But why are we even concerned with using a study to inform managerial decision here? Well, turns out we are concerned because evidence-based management is the application of factual information to decision making in business organization. So rather than rely on intuition or belief, managers use scientific studies to run their organization and promote efficiency and productivity at the same time. Pfeiffer and Sutton in their Harvard Business Review article state that when managers act on better logic and evidence, their companies will trump the competition. Continuing, they assert that evidence-based management is conducted best not by know-it-alls, but by managers who profoundly appreciate how much they do not know. So taking the risk of using Melcar and Bosco as a template for Brookshire, as a board member and management scholar practitioner, I want to make sure that my organization is on the right track. For that reason, it is important that we take a hard look at Melcar and Bosco and see whether there is a better study out there that will provide a better template for our current situation. After much research and analysis, I have concluded that Melcar and Bosco is inadequate and that Ozil and all is more suitable for us. I will explain the reasons for my choice in subsequent slides. Introduction. The concept of servant leadership going forward described as SL derives from the natural feeling to serve, or as Greenleaf puts it, to serve first. SL is a relatively new concept in management, and it's exactly the opposite of the prevailing leadership paradigm, which is leader first and follower second. In fact, Graham and Jones argue that SL focuses on fulfilling the needs of the follower first, the needs of the organization second, and the needs of the leader last, in that order. In this sense, and according to Page and Wang, SL is essentially distancing from using power, influence, and position to serve oneself. Instead, it is the act of using these instruments to encourage those within one's circle of influence. But the true test of SL, according to Greenleaf, who actually coined this phrase, servant leadership, is to determine whether those served grow as persons, become servants themselves. This is actually important. So for our purposes, and going by Greenleaf's test, it is not enough to institute a servant leadership policy at Brookshire. We must go a step further, and that is, we must determine whether this new leadership style is yielding dividends in terms of training future leaders. Philosophical perspective. What consist knowledge for Melcar and Bosco can be gleaned first from their survey and data collection procedures. Although their study combines qualitative review and quantitative analysis, it is hard to accept their ontological position when, in fact, the data collection procedures lacked transparency. For example, we are not shown how interviews reviewed behaviors and attitudes of respondents consistent with servant leadership. Because their survey procedures did not exhibit rigorous efforts to mitigate bias, it is hard to believe their realist stance if we are to accept the objectivity. Merker and Bosco exhibit weak epistemological stance by poorly developed hypothesis. Although they show considerable literature review, however, the reader is not shown how the literature review connects directly to either of the hypotheses. Rather, it would seem that literature review only elucidates servant leadership rather than connect the reader to what is actually being tested. There is no pre-test or post-test, no experimental or control group. It is not that these are necessarily required to solidify a study. However, their absence can be mitigated through strong internal data validity procedures. Those procedures are either lacking in Merker and Bosco or perfunctorily treated. On the other hand, Ozil, and all show strong positivist stance through rigorous and transparent data collection procedures. To further shore up their ontological stance, they go on to great lengths to collect large samples in both studies. To be specific, 284 for study 1 and 286 for study 2. Rather than use one study, they choose two studies just to ensure consistency and freedom from bias. Both the ontological and epistemological stances can be seen in their rigorous effort to validate their data while keeping the process transparent. They exhibit axiological stance by openly admitting to their erroneous assumptions in some of the hypotheses. Oximaz and all exhibit strong realist and positivist stances by methodically explaining the process of their internal validity. Each independent variable is tested using readily available and appropriate measure. I have spent time honing in on sampling in this slide because sampling frames are not if sampling frames are not representative of the population at large, inferences derived by such a sample may not be generalizable. This is the case with Merker and Bosco, as the next three slides will show, and that's why it would be too risky to even consider Merker and Bosco as a template for servant leadership at Brookshire at this time. On the other hand, Alzheimer's and all started with a clear purpose and well-developed hypothesis with extensive literature review to mitigate potential bias in their sampling. They conducted two studies, each with a large sample. They avoided the problem of Merker and Bosco by sampling 27 organizations drawn from a cross-section of service industry and manufacturing. To increase the validity of their sample, they employed a stratified random sampling strategy in which a sampled person was given the same probability of being selected for sample of the stratum. And all departments in each participating company were represented in the sample. Each employee was assigned a number to maintain anonymity, and return envelopes were all sealed. Then the authors used common methods variants to show how data source can affect the result of the study. For example, the authors were able to show that psychological climate, not SL, and job satisfaction is a positive and significant antecedent to employee OCB. Data analysis. Ozymandias and all clearly state that their study focused on the direct and mediating effects of SL on job satisfaction, psychological climate, and organizational citizenship behavior (OCB) on individual level of analysis in a for-profit organizational context. This is important because the essence of SL culture is the acceptance of the behavior starting at individual level. Ozymandias and all also examine SL, job satisfaction, and psychological climate as antecedents of organizational citizenship behavior. Merker and Bosco conducted their study using strategic management as a unit of analysis. We're not sure how this type of emphasis can provide a blueprint for Brookshire at this time. A hallmark of good research is a clearly delineated IV and DV, independent variable and dependent variable. In Merker and Bosco, it is hard to pinpoint a DV. Is it employee performance or is it a SL culture? Although one can surmise that the IVs are the 5 elements obtained from Debuter and Wheeler. In Ozymandias and all, not only are the variables clearly stated, the authors go a step further. They illustrate the variables graphically twice in the introduction and at the end of analysis to describe the results of the analysis. Merca and Bosco sampled only 59 people from 3 dealerships, but concluded that their results could likely be used in other for-profit organizations. But we know that sampling frame may not entirely be representative of the population at large. If so, then results obtained from such a study cannot be generalizable to the population. Contrastingly, where data is sourced from a wide variety of individuals, firms, or other units, the case of generalizability is strengthened. Ozymandias and all conducted 2 separate surveys covering a cross-section of for-profit organizations in Turkey. Then they used common methods variance to determine whether the source of data affected the outcomes of the survey. Continuing on survey and sample, certain controls can help assure internal validity. These include eliminating extraneous variables, including extraneous variables in research design, and eliminating their effects on the DV. Measuring extraneous variables and using them as covariables during statistical testing process. Finally, randomization can cancel out the effects of extraneous variables through random sampling. Ozymandias and all employed a stratified random sampling strategy for both surveys to ensure that all of the departments in each participating company were represented in the sample. Typically, a sample is biased if its distribution cannot be estimated or if the sampling distribution violates the 68, 95, 99 percentile rule. Merca and Bosco merely inform us that the means of the 5 standard leadership factors had values above a certain arithmetic mean without proof. We are not shown any frequency distribution since they use a very small sample. A normal distribution is not illustrated. With such undercoverage bias, it is doubtful that the results from this survey can be generalizable in any way. Both Merca and Bosco and Ozymandias and all use ANOVA in their studies. ANOVA is used to determine whether there are statistically differences between the means of 3 or more IVs. In general, ANOVA is used to make comparisons, for example, comparisons about means, weights, etc. Since both studies involved multiple populations and means, ANOVA was probably appropriate in each case from that standpoint. A t-test was inappropriate because it involves only 2 means. However, ANOVA assumes that the expected values of the errors are 0, the variances of all errors are equal to each other, the errors are independent, and the errors are normally distributed. So we cannot conclusively state that Merca and Bosco met this criteria. Therefore, we reject the use of ANOVA in the analysis. In comparison, Ozymandias and all offer a thorough explanation of the data collection and sampling procedures. They randomized their sample to strengthen their data. They collected large sample 284 and 286 respectively from 2 surveys. They used the CMV to gauge the effects of the source of data on the DV. They used factor loading, confirmatory factor analysis to determine the adequacy of their models. They use z-score to measure the effect size of the variables wherever a significant level was attributed. In conclusion, even Merca and Bosco acknowledged the fact that servant leadership lacks support from published, well-designed empirical research and that it relies on examples that are mostly anecdotal in nature. This is true. The problem stems partly from the prevailing management practice whereby the leader is the main player in the organization and the followers simply follow the leader. Since we have such a dearth in a well-designed empirical research about servant leadership, it is imperative that Brookshire exercise utmost care in its choice. Merca and Bosco does not provide a convincing blueprint because of reasons I have already pointed out in this presentation. On the other hand, Ozymandias and all have shown a thorough explanation of their study, the reliability of their data, and how the analysis led to their conclusions. It was impressive that the authors were willing to accept when they were wrong throughout. One caveat, Ozzy and all conducted their study in a non-Western setting. However, their study verified the consistency of the scales that were chiefly developed in Western settings. For such a huge organizational cultural shift, Mecca and Bosco is now worth the gamble. Instead, Ozzy and all can provide a credible blueprint for introducing SL culture at Brookshore.